Welcome to Circle of Hearts Radio. Journey with Grandmother Alaya as she enters her magical world of relics, sacred sites, and ancient crystal skulls. Meet with exciting trailblazer authors and individuals shifting the consciousness of humanity. Send her your questions to be answered on air on her monthly segment, Ask the Oracle. And now your host, Grandmother Alaya, in the sanctuary on the airwaves on OMTimes Radio.
Welcome to Circle of Hearts Radio on OMTimes Radio. Welcome to my sanctuary. And it's awful hot here in New Jersey, so bear with me on today. I have a wonderful guest, and it's one of those circumstances of being perfect timing for the information coming out. So many people awakening to self-knowledge on all different levels. Everybody awakens when their soul has deemed it ready. There's no rights, no wrongs. It's just a progression of soul growth. And our job is to put out information there. So when you're ready, you have something available as reference points. And this is what my guest Colleen Mauro is doing today. She's wrote an awesome book, Spiritual Telepathy, and this is a little bit of background on her before I introduce her. In the late 80s, Colleen Mauro founded Intuition, a magazine for the higher potential of the mind, to introduce readers to the emerging field of intuition development. Intuition was published until the year 2000 in her new book, Spiritual Telepathy, Ancient Teachings to Access the Wisdom of Your Soul. She introduces readers to a more advanced type of spiritual perception called spiritual telepathy. The technique she introduces comes from a body of knowledge called Ageless Wisdom, also called the esoteric or mystery teachers. The wisdom was first put into book form by the Hindu sage Patanjali in his classic book, the Yoga Sutras. For her book, Colleen drew on a variety of cultures and spiritual traditions, both ancient and modern, and explains how the new science validates these ancient teachings. This is a wonderful guidebook. It's a wonderful book to have as a foundation for your understanding of actually what's going on. So I'm not going to, there's a lot of information to cover, so I want to bring on Colleen. How are you doing today, Colleen?
Fine. Thank you for having me on your show.
Like I said, there's so much to bring forth. And for you to, I'd like to start off with your personal journey. How were you led to write the book? What inspired you? What was your passion in this?
Well, I love to tell the story because it's such a good illustration of the experience. In the late 80s, I was living in San Francisco, and I had worked in alternative magazine publishing for several years, and I suddenly found myself unemployed, and I was trying to figure out what to do. I had already worked for all the magazines I liked, so I was a little stumped about my next step. And I spent my days researching new magazines, talking to editors, and worrying a lot about money. And one morning I woke up and I decided to give myself a mental health day, that I would give myself 24 hours where I wouldn't think about the fact that I was unemployed and I had to find a job as soon as possible. I remember it was October, and that's my favorite month in San Francisco. I decided to go out and buy some bulbs and spend the day puttering around in my garden in the back. And as I was puttering around, I had a type of an intuitive experience that I'd never had before. A thought just flashed through my mind. And I immediately knew that it wasn't my thought. It felt like the words had been dropped right into my brain. And the words were the Center for Applied Intuition. And I had always accessed information, intuitive information, through feelings or some sort of body-based sensation like a queasy stomach. But this was a very mental experience. It was just like the words just appeared in my brain. And I knew right away it wasn't my thought. It certainly made no logical sense. I knew about the center, and I had met Bill Kautz, who was the founder, but I couldn't imagine why I would go there to look for a magazine job. I knew he had a 2-room office and that he ran intuition trainings, but it didn't really make any sense, in the context of what I was looking for. So I just thought about it for a few days and then suddenly thought, well, what the heck? What have I got to lose? And I called him up and asked him to send me information about the center's activities. And a few days later, I got a big package. And when I dumped it out, there were several brochures and a very simple typewritten journal called Applied Psi. And this was the quarterly publication that he sent to the center's 200 members. And the journal was about the subjects of intuition and creativity. And as I flipped through the pages, I thought, wow, this could be a real magazine. It'd have to have a new name, and it would have to be spiffed up, but I thought that the subjects would appeal to an audience way beyond the center's small membership. So I called him up, made an appointment, and when I went over to speak with him, I told him about my idea, and he just lit up and told me that he had always dreamed of turning it into a real magazine, but the right person had never come along. So I went home, created a proposal, came back the next day, and suddenly was launching a new magazine. And as you mentioned, we called it Intuition, a magazine for the higher potential of the mind. I got 2 issues out before Bill closed the center and signed the rights over to me, and I later got a grant and set up an office and hired staff. And I ran the magazine, as you mentioned, until the year 2000. And then I started to study the Ageless Wisdom teachings. And I was immediately struck and fascinated by the subject of spiritual telepathy. And I realized that this was really the next step in the work that I had done with intuition, that it was actually a higher type of spiritual perception. And so I spent the next 10 years very intently studying this subject. Wrote the book.
Was it, now that the intuition. Now, I think the next progressive question would be, how would you define spiritual telepathy as an overview to start off with?
I define it as communication from the subtle worlds, from our souls, or from even higher levels. And communication from the subtle worlds is always telepathic. We don't audibly hear the information. It's just dropped into our brains where it's formulated into thought. And the reason I like to tell that garden story so much is that it's a perfect illustration of how this actually happens.
I notice that happens a lot with me because I'm not a person that has gone involved in channeling.
Mm-hmm.
I seem to have some kind of blockage, For a thought to come to, they really have to, like hit me across the back of the head,
Mm-hmm.
Listen to what's coming. But it's that idea of all of a sudden a name or a thought or a direction is in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in your book, you also define there's several different types of this telepathy, which can you express as far as clarity, as far as, maybe the gut instinct versus it dropping into your head, etc.?
Sure.
3 different types.
Sure, there's 3 types. The first is instinctual, feeling-based telepathy, and we share this type of telepathy with the animal kingdom. And as I've discovered, it's still used as a means of communication in indigenous cultures. This is our gut feeling, our instinct. And the second is mind-to-mind telepathy, and the highest, as I mentioned, is spiritual or soul-to-soul telepathy. And what I like about this teaching is that it illustrates the progression of our perceptual abilities, from the instinct of the caveman to the intellect of modern man to the pure intuitive knowing of the future man. And we're right at that doorway now where we're taking that step into the future and moving beyond the rational mind to pure intuitive knowing.
It was good that you, define these, because a lot of people are at a point of experiencing so much stimulus information, and they don't know where anything's coming from. Some get that gut instinct.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel I need to do this. And then they're bombarded with emotionals from other people, and that's not always telepathy, but it's the example of, I was thinking of you.
Mm-hmm.
That soul to soul. And then you have the spiritual, which is a little higher. Maybe would you define it as a form of guidance?
Yes, sure, absolutely. It's guidance from the soul. And we also have the ability to access even higher levels of information from the universal or divine mind. And the soul really is the portal to the subtle worlds.
So, breaking it down, actually, in your book, and hearing you speak of it, it brings a lot of clarity. It gives people a starting point, a foundational point, which I think is really, fantastic, because people are really wandering around from what I'm seeing, and they go, I don't know what's going on here. So that's why books, as I had put on the promo, is a very timely situation for you to have brought this book into manifestation.
Well, I wanted it to be a very practical, step-by-step kind of approach, because the source material is very esoteric and often hard to read. So the book provides both the theory and a very simple step-by-step mind training practices that will allow the reader to make direct contact with the soul, and through the soul to even higher worlds.
Which is good, like you say, it's a guidebook, and from what I'm seeing, you give practical exercises. You've given the science, you've given the ancient mystic. Esoteric sometimes scare people off, that word, but you've made it very approachable. And then in your work saying, okay, here's the basis on it, and this is how to use it, which is really great.
Well, before I actually wrote the book, I thought very carefully about how to best present this material, because I wanted to reach an audience wider than those already reading the esoteric books. So I put time into showing people how these teachings are actually universal, and they can be found at the very heart of all of our spiritual traditions. And I didn't have a background in world religion, so I really spent years studying this and looking at ways that I could present this to people. And to me, it was very touching to see that this teaching exists everywhere, and it's always been there, and it's always just been there waiting for us to be ready.
Yeah, and it's great when it's reintroduced. Oh, we have a commercial break. We'll be back shortly.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
What if we got rewarded for every good decision?
Dinner. Meal needs a vegetable. Check.
Amazing.
Vegetables cooked with a healthier oil instead of butter?
Fantastic.
Replacing bad fats with healthier fats like those in canola or vegetable oil is good for your heart. Take up the challenge for good health, because the you of the future will say,
fantastic.
Visit heart.org/face the fats. Canola Info proudly supports the American Heart Association's Face the Fats campaign.
There is no death, only a change of worlds. Chief Seattle. Deborah Livingston is an award-winning intuitive psychic medium whose international services include mediumship, spiritual assessment, animal communication, and spiritual mentoring. She is a published author and a trained shaman. Deborah provides evidential messages from spirit and departed loved ones. Learn more at deblivemedium.com. That's DEBLIV medium.com.
Well, we're back with Colleen. Now, in the prior segment, we gave you mentioned this book, which is, again, a wonderful guidebook. You have You present the foundation, present the references of how in different cultures this was brought forth and is reemerging now. Now in this other segment, let's get to the how-to. People are very interested in self-help or how to do something. And a lot of us, we've become to learn that it's an individual journey. We really don't always want somebody on top of you saying, well, this is what we got to do in mass. You learn more from the wisdom within you, but a lot of times we need that trigger to see something in front of us, and this is what your book does. So you propose a question: how do we cultivate this type of higher perception? How do people start getting started?
Well, we do it through the daily practice of a type of meditation called creative meditation or Raja Yoga. And many meditation practices focus only on quieting the mind. This is a very active type of meditation, and that really worked well for me. In this type of meditation, we very actively train our minds to make contact with the soul and then to transmit information from the soul to the brain. The information has to reach the brain to become part of our conscious awareness. And it's just like the ways that our homes are wired for telephone and internet connection. This type of meditation allows us to create the threads and cables that link us to the higher worlds. And we do this by projecting our attention upward to the soul day after day. We visualize the soul as a star about 6 inches above our heads. And when we do this attention focused upward, we anchor small threads of energy that eventually form a symbolic bridge between the mind, the brain, and the soul. The mind is actually the conduit between the soul and the brain. And this bridge is called the Rainbow Bridge or the Bridge of Light in the Wisdom teachings. It's actually in every tradition. It's called the Antakarana in the Hindu text. And I even found it in the Bible. It's called the Straight or Narrow Gate in the New Testament.
So if somebody was saying, let's say, how can we say, I'm looking for a person that has no awareness at this point. You know, they have the awareness in them, okay? Mm-hmm. But we want to bring it forth, and they have that stirring, let's say, in their gut. Or, you know, that intuition from that inner soul wisdom saying, oh, it's okay now. Now it's time to get started on this, you know, growth journey. How would they start? I know you said the meditation, but would you say with all the energies going around that maybe they should refine their body a little bit by working with what they ingest?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a preliminary step in esoteric training that's called the refinement of our physical, emotional, and mental bodies. And that's a really important first step. And this was really an issue for me, and I put a lot of my own personal experiences in the book, figuring if it was an issue for me, it'd be an issue for a lot of people. What we need to do is we need to create a direct line of communication between the soul, the mind, and the brain. And to do this, we need to purify the physical body and quiet our minds and emotions. If we have an illness, if we're tired, or especially if we have mental or emotional static, it becomes hard for our brains to register these subtle currents of thought. Especially emotional turmoil will actually repel these subtle levels of thought. And what I discovered in researching this is that refinement practices are part of all spiritual traditions, and the methods vary, but the requirements and the goals are exactly the same. Purity of body, control of the mind, and control of the emotions. And in the book, I included the refinement practices that helped me the most. And this was, as I said, a big issue for me because when I got really serious about really quieting myself down to meditate deeply, I discovered that I had a lot of emotional trash, even though I had done a lot of therapeutic work when I was younger. That the quieter you become, the easier it is for that stuff to come bubbling up, and it really does get in our way. And I think this is a big block that a lot of people have. And I was so frustrated by my inability to meditate deeply and stay focused that I started working with a spiritual healer. His name is Stephen Lumiere, and he really helped me a lot. He gave me a prescription, so to speak. It was 3 meditations he wanted me to do every day. One was on forgiveness. I had a lot of people I needed to forgive. One was on compassion, and one was on loving kindness. And I did these 3 meditations day after day after day. And what I discovered is that I slowly started to quiet down. I really did become more forgiving and more tolerant. And as that progressed, I started to be able to meditate more deeply. And this is so common. Jack Kornfield has talked about this a lot, too. He says that when he first started to teach meditation, he discovered that at least half of his students were unable to master the basic concentration exercises for the same reason. They had so much emotional turmoil. And he really has been a pioneer in bringing Western psychotherapy practices into Eastern contemplative practices to help people quiet down. So some of us need therapy. Some of us need these refinement practices. You have to kind of find your own way. And my experience was that it made a huge, huge, huge difference. And so I really sort of outlined them all. There's actually 12 meditations and 2 additional practices in the book, and some of them are these preliminary meditations and practices. Harmlessness, the nightly review, and then the meditations on loving kindness, forgiveness, compassion, and really makes a difference. Really makes a difference.
What I'm thinking is the person, let's say, the woman that's going out just to be, the homemaker or the businesswoman. Timing is so important. Do you think that first stirring of, well, there's more to life than what I see, then they have to also arrange, the biggest thing is to find time. Mm-hmm. That's a mental issue right there. Is you have to find, okay, I'm worth this time. I'm worth holding up in a room or a bathroom. Mm-hmm. Or taking a hot bath or something. This is my personal time. And then to, follow the directions that are in this book, the guidance. But also, I think a big thing is when you're mentioning the emotional, is to get away from the mass fears. Mm-hmm. Get away from the media. Is that unrealistic nowadays, or that's something we should put our attention to?
Well, Patanjali talked about this many thousands of years ago. He said that we should have a media diet, which in that time frame meant watch what you take in written form. But in our culture, there's many forms of media. I just would encourage people to just see how it affects them. I watch the news. I don't really have a problem with it, but it just depends on how much it kind of upsets our equilibrium.
I was thinking your book has a lot of value is I watch Facebook a lot to see what's going on as far as the social media goes and what mm-hmm. people are looking for and what kind of information they may need to help them. And most of it, they're so lost in this crazy world of emotional turmoil or dealing with relationships. I think they need to be able to address that personal sense of, I need a little time to myself, and how much can I take in from the media, and the word discernment. So I only brought this up is your information is for everybody. How they get started is, I think they need the intent. I think they need the desire. Mm-hmm. So, just want to let people know, if you really want to do this, you have that stirring. Colleen is providing the information and a great guidebook, to follow through. And this goes in with the question, why is this work so important right now?
Well, I think it's very important because when we make contact with the soul, everything changes. we lose our sense of separateness and realize that we're all connected. And you can imagine how the world would change if a critical mass of people made this shift. I think some of the problems we have now, this mess in the Middle East, really can only be changed with this shift in consciousness. And I think many people feel called to be part of this. And as I said, it's a higher type of intuition. I think that our personal intuition gives us guidance about our relationship and our relationships in our day-to-day lives, our work, and so on. But the soul knows our higher purpose and can help us understand what we're here to do. And I think many people are feeling called to be part of this big shift. And I think that's the stirring that so many people feel right now. So what I wanted to do was really address that in the book and give people this practice for making that direct contact to the soul.
Because a lot of people, I know just from what I observe in different cultures or people that listen to the show, so many people feel, well, this doesn't pertain to me, that I may feel it, but my culture says this is not that it's not acceptable. I think they need to delve into their culture a little more to see it really is acceptable. But, there's been some boundaries or restraints put on it. So if we go overall, worldwide, like Colleen says, the mass consciousness awakening, everybody's feeling that stirring, that opening up of the heart chakra. So it's good when you have valuable information that you can connect the heart to the mind.
Exactly.
So this is the seeds Colleen's putting out today, to say, okay, this is available to everyone. You don't have to follow the ancient mystery schools. This is a very practical, realistic, day-to-day guidebook. If you take that first step.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go into the next section. Hold on.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Hello! Join us, Lisa Berry and Michelle Carter, every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the Mindset Makeover, What's Possible. Get ready to become present, clear, and unstuck, and start living fully, led by your heart. While you listen and feel this transformation through vibration of word, sound, and song, you'll open up to what's possible and experience your shift.
Since the day I stopped drinking, my life has gotten better and better. I can't take any credit for it. It just seems that without alcohol, I think better, I'm more careful with money, I watch what I say, I don't get into trouble like I did when I was drinking. It's scary trying to walk through life alone, and today I have that very distinct feeling that I don't ever have to be alone again. Alcoholics Anonymous. It works. Look us up. Check your phone book, newspaper, or AA.org.
Back with Colleen, and like I said, there's a lot of wonderful information that I'm trying to get out here. In a question you proposed, you say that the experience we call genius appears when the brain registers the light of the soul. Can you clarify this a little?
Sure. I really enjoy talking about this, and it was really fun to research this because I did come across that statement over and over in the esoteric literature that genius appears when the brain registers the light of the soul. And so I started researching this, and I went back and I read a book that had been one of my favorite books for years. It was called Higher Creativity, written by Willis Harman, who was the president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And in this book, he looked at the biographies of many artists, writers, composers, and scientists, and discovered that their greatest achievements came from an intuitive breakthrough. And I reread that book, and then I started to read some of his original sources. And I read the full text of some of the interviews that were done with these geniuses, and discovered that many of these people talked about their creative process in exactly the way it's explained in the wisdom teachings, that it was through the soul that they had access to this universal flow of information and inspiration. And one of the books, excuse me, one of the books that I especially liked was called Talks with Great Composers. It was written in the late 1800s, but not published until the 50s. The author had an agreement with Brahms not to publish until after his death. And he interviewed many composers about the source of their genius. He interviewed Puccini, Brahms, Strauss, Wagner, and many other composers. And I was absolutely fascinated by the consistency of their experience. Each of them talked about the soul as a portal to the universal soul of information. And once they were connected to the source, the ideas and images simply flowed into their brains. And I included many of these stories in the book. And it became very clear that genius is just not some rare and random event that happens only to certain special people, but it's an experience that each of us can cultivate. Albert Einstein is a perfect example from the scientific world, and he talked very directly about his inspiration coming from a higher source. He said, there comes a time when the mind takes a higher plane of knowledge. All great discoveries have involved such a leap. And you see these kinds of quotes over and over again, and you realize that this is really the key. And since we all have that ability to make contact with the soul, we all have that ability to become everyday geniuses. And again, when a critical mass of people are able to pull in these higher levels of inspiration, you can imagine the wonderful ways that our world will change.
And we could have a whole show just on this alone. I was thinking about when you said Einstein, you think of Tulsa.
Right.
Then also the children that are coming in, that are coming in, what they label them as crystal, or et cetera, et cetera. They have this automatic contact that is not blocked. And if you see, and this is worldwide, I mean, if you look in the Middle East or all different parts of countries, you read of these young children who are bringing new ideas out or for environmental solutions. And this is purely this contact where, I don't know, like you said, a soul contact, portal. And it's really day to day, and it's available.
I think that's true. I think that's true. And the difference, I think, is that their brains are a little bit more evolved, and it's because of their brain configurations, it's easier to access information intuitively than by learning by rote in the way that our educational system is set up. And that's why so many of them are being diagnosed with ADD, and they have to be medicated to be able to fit into that kind of educational system. But Alice Bailey has said that the education of the future will include this bridge building technique that will allow people to bring in information by intuitive means. And
there's more authors out there that are writing about exactly this bridging of PMH Atwater with the New Millennium Children.
Right.
We had interviewed her a few months ago, is exactly saying the same thing that you're saying about how the younger people are coming in with this ability to go right to it. to access this, and it's really fascinating. There's just also a little bit of clarity as far as, the brain and mind. You love to question, you discuss the differences between the mind and the brain.
Mm-hmm. Well, the brain is local or personal, and it's encased in our skulls, and the mind is non-local or universal. Each of our individual minds are part of the universal mind. So that's how we have access to everything. The universal mind is the repository of all information, past, present, and future. And that's what these geniuses are managing to connect with. When I was writing this book, I had a really interesting dream. I spent years very slowly studying this material, and I had a dream that I was working on a project, and I was very slowly adding information and filing it, and I was working steadily but very slowly because I was blind. And then at a certain point, it dawned on me that I wasn't blind, that it was possible to work faster. I just hadn't realized that I could see. And when I woke up, I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because the truth is that we can all access all information at any time, that it's all present in the subtle worlds that surround us. The key really is to create this bridge that allows us to bring it in. And I wanted that to happen to kind of speed up my process. And it did start happening towards the end, where things would pop into my brain that I realized didn't come from me, that I didn't really know anything about. For example, I was writing about how we can raise the vibration of the physical body so it can more easily be attuned to this higher level of information. And what dropped into my mind is that the practices of Qigong and Tai Chi were one ways of doing this. And I didn't have any information about that, but I started to look into it, and I realized that that was true, that when you do these very slow, precise movements, you actually start to attune yourself to the subtle energies, and that the body, it's incorporated into the body over time. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. So I looked into something that I didn't know anything about. And that was fun to get those little nuggets of information.
It's that's just an interesting point that you brought up, because before I had my brain tumor, I had that idea of investigating Qigong and moving the energy. Actually, you learn to move energy. It's a very interesting concept against the mind-brain. The brain is the physical receptor. It is the mechanical part that sends the signals to your body. But the mind is which feeds the brain. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. The brain, you might say that the brain is the receiver, like a radio station. Okay. And the mind is the conduit, sort of the link between the soul and the brain. So when we learn to get control of the mind, so we can make it into a tool that allows us to pull in information from the subtle worlds. And when we do this type of mind training, the mind actually becomes our servant rather than our master. It's the tool that allows us to pull information from the higher worlds and deposit it into the brain, where it becomes part of our conscious awareness. If it doesn't hit the brain, it stays as this sort of nebulous kind of information that we kind of can't quite grasp. It has to be in the brain.
Which is really interesting, because everybody's so interested now about manifestation, because everything around you is you're the creator, you're the one that manifests. But breaking it down to practical or foundational information, break it down simple, as Colleen says. You have the physical brain. You have the intuitive mind consciousness. I may not explain this way. I'm sure you can, redirect me here. That feeds us, and our brain helps us to co-create or to manifest. So you can re-explain that. That just popped in my head.
No, I think you did a good job. The most important thing is that the mind can actually be trained to be a tool, and that's the point of this mind training, that we can focus it in any direction. We can focus it outward and get information that way, and the information comes through our five senses. But it can also be trained to access information from the subtle world, and when that happens, it really becomes our true sixth sense. It's our sense that allows us to pull in information from those higher planes.
So you were pretty much saying spiritual telepathy is a subtle world that we're tapping into and utilizing.
Yeah. Right, we're able to communicate with the subtle world. Information can be given to us from the soul and from even higher beings, and that happens sometimes with some people. And so, and it can also be kind of a two-way conversation, but essentially, in the beginning, especially, it's sort of a one-way communication that you get information from the soul.
And then once you have a feeling of comfort with it, then, like you said, the two-way communication is like when we have a feeling, well, someone's thinking about us. We need to reach out to them. Or our gut feeling, how we perceived our environment or the energy of others. It's fascinating, really, when you really start putting it together. You see, it's really a lot simpler.
It really is. And the practice itself is very simple. I have 3 successive mind training practices in the book, and they don't really take much time. The first one is 10 to 15 minutes, and it's to be done first thing in the morning. And most people can organize their time so they have that small amount of time in the morning. And what happens is over time when you start to do it, when you don't do it, it feels very odd. If I don't do it now, it feels like I haven't brushed my teeth or something. I can't really start my day in any kind of balanced way. So it becomes part of you and really part of your whole routine.
Yeah, and that's sort of in addition to what many people are bringing forth of establishing a routine, not just physically, but establishing the routine for your mind. The information that becoming open, get that discipline going. And it's not, discipline is a hard word. Routine, I think I like better. It gives you a sense of purpose and empowerment that's going on. Now, we have about one more minute before the next segment. The next segment, I've asked Colleen to go and give us all her information and maybe some parting thoughts. So I'm going to pretty much leave that segment to her and not interject too much. So that's why I figured I'd do this now while I had a chance. Get her mind prepared to what she wants to, bring forth. Because it's really fascinating. You see a book, you have a name here, and then when you start listening to the author and she starts bringing out her whole journey with the book, it takes on a whole different light. Really. I mean, I read the book. I was fascinated by it. But talking to Colleen, it's even greater. We'll be back.
Feed your soul with Waves of Consciousness on OMTimes Radio. The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness in action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
I'm Alec Baldwin with People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I grew up loving circuses and other traveling animal shows, but it never occurred to me what life might be like for the animals. Training wild animals to do things they don't understand takes force. Routine discipline with a hook or whip with the heel of a boot shows the animal exactly who's the boss. Don't patronize animal acts. Please contact People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals.
757-622-PETA.
Well, as always, this show goes extremely fast, and we try to really bring out, a lot of high points on this information. And I had mentioned on the prior to the commercial, I wanted Colleen to bring forth her contact information, etc. But I also, when you're done, Colleen, I'd like you to go over the question: how has this work changed your life? That's how we'll end it. Okay.
Okay. People can reach me through my website. It's spiritualtelepathy.net. They can read the introduction to the book there, and there's various links to buy the book. And this I'm glad you asked that question, because this work has been very, very life-changing for me. And I think that it's a very subtle process. I hadn't really come across this in any book, but this is how I experienced it. We end the meditation by asking that soul light pours down over our lower bodies to calm our minds and emotions and to invigorate our physical bodies. And that daily contact with the light of our souls starts to raise our vibration. And I think it speeds up our evolution. It starts to open our heart more. It's a very subtle energetic process. But what happens is we start to look at things from a higher perspective. And I notice that I'm a lot more tolerant and less judgmental. And I just have more peace and joy in my life and a more consistent source of guidance. I don't think that there's anything better in the world than to be really in touch with what your higher purpose is. And I think that so many of us have that longing. And I think it's that longing that brings us into these practices and it helps us to go through this period of quieting ourselves down and training the mind so we have this direct access, that it's really worth it, absolutely worth it. And when we do this, we really become intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds, that we can bring down these new ideas for our own lives and to give to the world in our individual service. That I think that humanity is seeded with new thoughts, and it's interesting to see, how this works. It seems to go by decades. When I started thinking about this, I realized that in the 70s, the focus was on psychism, and there were a lot of books and audio programs and schools that sprung up, on a lot of psychics. And in the 80s, there was a big focus on channeling. And it was always that there was information outside of ourselves, and we had to go to these professionals to ask questions about our own lives. And in the 90s, the focus shifted to intuition, where we were learning to access our own information. And now I think that the next step is really here, that we can go even higher than our personal intuition and get this direct soul guidance. So I think it's really time for this. And I think that it took me years to write this book, and I think I accidentally timed it just right, because I got it out at just the time that I think people are opening up to this and people are ready for this.
I was just laughing when you said that, because that was the other question I was going to ask you about the divine timing. So you answered that before I even had to ask.
And again, it was totally accidental on my part. When I started the book, I had no idea what a journey it would be, because I understood how it could be placed in this wider context, but I also realized that I didn't really have the knowledge, and I was going to have to really study this intently, and that's why it took so long.
And it's a good point that you bring up is I think we're in a cycle of people looking at things with new eyes.
Mm-hmm.
We see what was before, and at that particular time, those teachings were very good for that cycle, and it's for the mass mind consciousness. But as we keep on evolving, it's that constant refinement. Some parts we take, some parts we leave. And now what I've noticed with the stressing point is new perceptions, choices. That's sort of a common joke on my show here, because we see things different, and when you see things different, you make different choices in your life. And right now it's self-empowerment. And this is available to everybody, and Colleen keeps on bringing this out. You know, we all have minds, we all have brains. It's not something for a selected few.
Exactly.
You need to make that, just if you hear that clarion call or that gut feeling that you want to investigate something, you know, you have works like Colleen's book, The Spiritual Telepathy, a wonderful guideline. It shows you information from the past as a reference, that this is not something new, something hokey, something new agey, etc. No, this has come down through time. It's been part of our ancestral knowledge that's within us, that's re-emerging, and we're just seeing it different. So this is very exciting. And the timing, I was talking to her before the show. I said it couldn't be more perfect timing that we happen to connect and schedule for this, because I believe people are ready for it.
I do too. And in the ancient world, this was considered a secret teaching. It was taught in the mystery schools, and only those that were deemed ready were allowed to be exposed to these practices. And now it's really up to us. It's available to anybody that wants it, and it's up to us to decide if we're ready.
And I think, again, go by that one form of telepathy or intuition, your gut instinct.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it starts. You know, you go to through that gut. There's something there, and let it evolve and investigate. And this is the first step into your own self-knowledge. So it took Colleen, I mean, she really, I know some of this information that she has studied. It wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, I really didn't know how much I didn't know. And because I really felt in every cell in my body how important this was, I really just buckled down and decided that I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do right by the subject and present it in a way that's accessible to people, because it is esoteric, and I think that really has limited the audience. And so I wanted to do something that anybody can pick up.
Yeah, the word esoteric scares people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they all of a sudden, like you said, it belonged in the ancient mystery schools, that secrecy. You're not, you have to be deemed worthy to do it. Well, we're telling everybody you all are worthy. It doesn't matter what you are in this life. You have an important purpose in this life. You know, your energy is vital to the evolution of other people and of your countries and of locations and of spiritual worlds all over. So you are worthy. There's no more secrets.
That's right. We all have a piece to contribute, and we're not here on the planet at this time by accident. And the world needs us. It needs each and every one of us.
I think that's such an important part, because I've run into so many people, and they have not exactly a victimhood, you know, mentality, but it doesn't pertain to me. And that's so untrue. Doesn't matter what you chose to be incarnated at this time. So your soul is more expansive, and now we're just trying to help you remember and give you guidelines to help you remember, not to tell you, but to help you find your way. So just before we end, again, Colleen, please state your website and contact information.
It's spiritualtelepathy.net, and there's direct link to email me. I love to get feedback from people. and I promise to answer your emails. It's the first thing I do every morning.
And you're on Facebook. Any other social media?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Google+. My publicist made me start a Twitter account, but I haven't done much about that yet. But, I'm on all those.
Which is important because I find you can pick up a book, but when you hear the person who created the book talk, it takes on a life of its own. So, I really enjoyed having you on this show, and I know we try to cover a lot, and I think we did. I think pretty much got, a great deal in there, and as I said, Colleen's book, Spiritual Telepathy, Ancient Techniques to Access the Wisdom of Your Soul, is a very good book for your self-growth toolkit, as we call. Something you can refer to, something you can evolve from. And she's very friendly. She won't beat you up. Contact her. She's here to help. This is part of her purpose in life. It's really wonderful listening to you talk. I learned a great deal. I read the book before, and I thought I knew some things. I found out, well, no, got to look at it differently. I learned a few more things today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed your questions.
All right, and as I loved having you, and we'll try to get this. I know it's going to be out on a Law podcast, and I'll send you the podcast tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
And have a wonderful week. And everybody, remember, you're very important to this world. No matter where you are, who you are, your soul means a lot to the development of the world and the ascension process we're going through. So check out these books. I highly recommend it. Thank you for listening. So until next week, many blessings to you. Bye-bye.